Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Griz Paths, your alumni career pathway series. My name is Jay Beagle, and I will be your moderator on today's panel. I am joined here with three wonderful panelists today, all who have made a great impact in journalism and media. Anytime during this discussion, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will get those asked for you. And yeah, we'll get started here. So I will let our panelists all introduce themselves and say your name, your role, what got you into journalism and media. Any of you take it away.
Yeah, I'll start. My name is Jackson Groff. I'm currently the associate producer at The Volume, where I work on Three and Out with John Middlecoff. It's a NFL college football based show where I help him with social clipping, segment structure, guest booking, whatever that is. Mostly on the social side with YouTube. We just announced our show being on Netflix, which is super exciting just to see where podcasts are going. So that's something that we're kind of adapting to. Netflix wants to get into the podcast game, so helping them out with that. I'm also on air where I give my college football analysis, react to certain breakdowns of what's going on in the sport, and kind of I've established my position at The Volume being a producer through my content creation. I also do sports content through TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. And what's led me to journalism, honestly, my whole life, I've been wanting to talk about football. I watched Rich Eisen, Scott Van Pelt, Stuart Scott, Chris Berman. Like, I'm a junkie old guy when it comes to sports media, and kind of wanted to bring more positivity in sports that can be negative. And yeah, kind of made it my way into The Volume, where I've been at since last July. So blessed to be here, and I'm thankful to answer your guys' questions.
Okay, I'll go. Hi everyone, my name is Bronte Woodpen. I guess we could say I'm kind of a Swiss Army knife in journalism. I kind of do it all. I am a writer, I'm a photojournalist, I'm a filmmaker, producer, and I've been fortunate enough to be a staff visual journalist at the San Francisco Chronicle for 4 years. I've been in journalism for 10 years. I am originally from Billings, Montana, and I would say what's led me into a career of journalism is, I wanted to see more people in rural America represented accurately and fairly in news media and journalism today. I think I've straddled both worlds of living very rurally, but also been very fortunate to live in places and work in communities all over the country. And so I have really focused my craft in elevating voices on an array of news topics, whether it's investigative journalism, whether it's, basically holding the powerful accountable. And so I feel really fortunate that I've been able to stay in newspapers for as long as I have, especially as we're seeing it changing a lot lately. So I'm very excited to talk about my career and the work that I've done and the communities that I've lived in. I'm happy to answer any questions and really start talking about the future of journalism in this time where so many of us are watching a massive political divide in this country right now.
Yeah. My name is Brian Kevin. I am sitting in the Washington, D.C. offices of National Geographic, where I am an editor on the features team, where I edit, assign, and write a bit for both our print and digital manifestations. I've been here just about a year. And prior to that, I was for a little over a decade at a city regional publication in Maine, where I lived until a year ago, after meeting my Mainer wife at the University of Montana. And there I was editor-in-chief of a sort of general interest magazine focused on the state of Maine called Down East, that's been around for like 70 years. And it's kind of a neat broad-based publication dedicated to a state with a very small population and a very large seasonal influx of people. So sort of a very hyper-regional focus with a weirdly national audience. And I cut my teeth in city regional publications prior to that. I came to magazine journalism primarily out of an interest in like long form feature storytelling, really from more of a storytelling standpoint than a like reportage interest as a younger person. But I've since sort of generated a like much greater interest in reportage and in sort of all the bricolage aspects of making magazine media, whether it's print or digital, which is to say, still have a fondness for a well-made long-form piece, but I also geek out at a, competently put together service package and love being in a place that's so photo forward for the last year and, get a kick out of like neat lifestyle packages and enjoy making those as much as I do some 5,000 word, yarn. So.
Well, thank you three for the introduction. And then our fourth panelist, Meg Oliver, she'll hopefully be joining us on the call about halfway through. This line of work never stops, as you guys can imagine, and there's always news to cover. And Meg is a news correspondent at CBS, and she had an interview pop up. So we should hopefully expect to see her later on. But for now, I'll get rolling with some questions, and then I'll head over to the chat. I see there's already one in there. But to kick us off, can you guys share your role that education at the University of Montana played in preparing you for a career in journalism?
Yeah, I think it gave me a lot of reps and kind of gave me a perspective on, the basics of reading and writing. I think that's some skills that, we've learned our entire life, but you didn't really take it to the next level until I went to Montana. And before I could even go on air, I had to really kind of study how am I supposed to write my scripts before I'm supposed to be on air, or how am I supposed to, speak in front of a camera, and really give me confidence and stuff like that. At the time when I was at UM, there wasn't a lot of broadcasting classes, which I think now they're starting to open up more because of just kind of where, journalism is going towards being more of a digital landscape. And I think more people are starting to have an interest in wanting to be on camera versus kind of being behind the scenes. But I also think that UM gave me that perspective of, appreciating the production aspect of, editing on Premiere, or I had an internship with SWX and I was doing Paddleheads games as a camera guy and I wasn't the on-air guy. So it gave me the perspective of, appreciating the behind the scenes people. And I think that's kind of what I took away from my time at UM.
I can jump in, Dave.
Okay,
oh, no,
cool.
you go.
No,
Let's keep the order.
I was gonna see if are we in an order? No,
we are. We totally are.
No, go for it. Go ahead.
Okay. I was not a journalism student at UM. I came as a graduate student in the creative writing program, where I was part of a very small cohort of nonfiction students in the MFA creative writing program. And I actually had my first magazine job prior to coming to UM. I had been an intern at a great city mag in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and wrapped up my internship, and they hired me, which was like Yahtzee. It was amazing because I hadn't studied journalism as an undergrad either. I kind of walked backwards into it. And I had already applied once to UM and not gotten in, but I had continued to apply until they said yes. And I was sort of on the fence about whether, because I was already working in journalism and getting an education sort of on the job, it was going to be valuable to pursue an MFA. And I have my critiques about the MFA ecosystem, to be honest, but the opportunity to spend what for me was 3 years because I was a part-time student, just really immersed in the craft of writing, which even at that time, having only kind of dabbled in a role as an editor, realized that learning to craft a story you're writing well is a skill that poured over, obviously, to editing. It just seemed too good of an opportunity to pass up. And so for me, I think that the real luxury of my MFA time at was just being able to spend day after day after day talking with really experienced and intelligent faculty. And I had some terrific mentors who themselves were pretty prolific, like magazine journalists, about the narrative craft and about structure and about character building and about tension and about the kinds of things that like a working journalist, if they're lucky, gets to sit with their top editor and nerd out about, but you certainly don't get to make it your day by day, for 3 years at a time. And I came out of the program a far better writer and by extension editor than I went into it.
Yeah, I would kind of piggyback off of Brian's response. I mean, I think for visual journalism, it's a little bit different. I think in order to be really successful in this career, it's less about being in the classroom and it's more about being in the field. And I think the program at the University of Montana School of Journalism provided opportunities through classes like native news, through classes like documentary, photojournalism. You're in class and sure, you're learning about how to make a good photo. I mean, personally for me, I don't really care what kind of tech you use. To be a good storyteller, to be a good journalist in this profession, you need to be, you need to be an empathetic, you need to be a caring, curious, dogged person in terms of wanting to understand the systems and the challenges that everyday people face. And so I think the only way to get good at that, to hone in on that craft, is being in the field and learning big lessons when you're dealing with communities, whether it's, telling stories within their indigenous communities in Montana. And I think being a part of Native News really pushed me for that. I mean, we're talking about, tribes, reservations in Montana, all, different communities in different geographical places in our state, and they all deal with different things in really intimate and different ways. And so I really enjoyed that class because that was real world experience. That was like, you're going into, unfortunately it's parachute journalism, but you are going in there in a raw way and being able to gain access and gain trust. And so I felt like that was one of the only classes for me personally that I really got to have a taste of what being a journalist in communities was today. And I'll also say that at a time when we're seeing bloggers and vloggers and TikTok influencers and just influencers on Instagram and on a scale that, we've never seen before, I think what separates us is that, at the University of Montana School of Journalism, we're raised with a really high ethical standard of journalistic ethics that you don't really learn from YouTube. You don't really learn from just picking up your cell phone and putting it towards you and starting to live blog. I mean, we're operating on a set of skills and foundational practices that needs to be taught in a controlled environment by professionals that are at the University of Montana. And I think that's what separates journalists from people in media. And so I take that very seriously. And I think that's what all of us should be really concerned about. That's something we all should be putting that into our practice every day. And so that's something that I think a role that the University of Montana played in my career and how I hone in on my craft.
So you all talked a little bit about your education. Can you all kind of tell us about your first job or internship, and were there any unexpected turns in that process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll keep the same order. Might as well. It's easier for everybody. Yeah, my first role, I had the internship. I was with SWX. I played at Montana. I played football for a little bit. Then COVID happened, and they had to reduce some roster spots. So unfortunately, being a walk-on, I was unfortunately cut. But it wasn't anything that I did. It was kind of just out of my control. So because of that, I'm big into my faith. God redirected the broadcasting dream back into my life, and I wanted to have an opportunity to do something with broadcasting. So I did my own podcast in my garage. I did a play-by-play announcing for soccer and for softball, and I'm not a big soccer guy. Never knew girls soccer at all. So I was like, any type of opportunity to get reps and kind of the quick, reaction and thinking, I would do that. I did some reporting for the basketball team where I would do like social interviews with the team. And then through that, honestly, like the podcast, I would bring on, football players I knew on the team, track athletes, volleyball, basketball, whoever. And this was pre-NIL, so I didn't have to pay anybody, which was super nice. Now I don't know how you can get, athletes because they want money nowadays. But because of that, I was able to get a job at a 7-on-7 company where I used to travel on the Pacific Northwest and just interview high school students or high school athletes, I should say, 4-star, 5-stars and stuff like that. So I would just say like my first job was the internship that kind of spiraled into other opportunities. And my biggest lesson from that was just, it was opportunities that I didn't want to sit there and kind of wait for it to come to me. I wanted to go after and seize every opportunity that I could, whether that was reaching out to the athletic program or I reached out to even Griz football at the time. The guy didn't really like me, and it's funny because I was on the team, but he didn't really like me. So he didn't, offer me that opportunity, which is totally fine. I mean, we all have been said no plenty of times, obviously being in this business. And as you learn, like you get said no, you kind of just got to move on to the next thing. But so yeah, kind of rambled there, but just a bunch of different roles that I tried to, establish my last 2 years that I was at Montana.
I spent my internship, as I said, was at this city mag called Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine. Still around, still crushes. Great city. They've, I'm sure, had a really interesting few months. An editor there took a flyer on me on account of I had started sort of pitching stories as a freelancer. So we're talking about like the early 2000s. Had started pitching stories as a freelancer out of college and had, I don't know, maybe a half dozen clips in really tiny small magazines, and applied for an internship with sort of those and no other particular experience. And they very kindly gave me a shot. And I spent most of that year fact checking, which I guess if this is a room full of people who are considering like first steps into journalism, I mean, if you can still find a place where you can spend a year fact checking, because the fact checking ecosystem is not as robust as it was 20 odd years ago, sadly, I can't say enough good things about what an education doing that for a year was. It did plenty of other stuff too, but that was kind of our bread and butter. That's probably the most valuable thing I can say about an internship, as well as that internship was paid. And I think it's almost a little problematic. I'm not obviously the first person to bring this up, how integral an internship is to getting a foothold in this field, kind of across media and across sort of different bailiwicks. The fact that unpaid internships are so often that first step is kind of a drag and end up being a gatekeeping force that, like kind of makes journalism self-select for a certain kind of person that can afford not to work for a year in their 20s. Do what you need to do. If you can avoid an unpaid internship, you're not only doing yourself a favor, but you're helping sort of chip away at a lousy system. But I think find a place where you're going to feel really passionate spending a year, and I know that that's like really worthwhile dues paying, or whatever we say.
Yeah, I feel like Brian and I have had very similar parallel tracks here because, my first internship was unpaid as well. I would say that the opportunities through the University of Montana School of Journalism, the pipeline really for internships, largely there is an opportunity with the local newspaper in Missoula, the Missoulian, which is where I got my first internship. But yes, it was unpaid, and I'll say, like, it is really hard to do this if, frankly, if you don't come from a background of money, especially if you're going to go off and freelance and be an independent. I mean, it's really hard to fund this by yourself. And so as a result of that, I mean, I worked restaurants in Missoula that funded my way through, college, that funded my way through being able to save for cameras and gear and all of that. But I'll say, like, working in restaurants made me a better journalist. I mean, it gives me an opportunity to talk to all kinds of people and deal with very stressful situations. I could finally say I've been in journalism longer than I've been in restaurants. But those kind of skills that you take away from working in those environments, I mean, it makes you an individual that can talk to anybody. And so my first internship was with the Missoulian. And then that funneled to my a second internship at the Billings Gazette, my hometown paper, which turned into a staff job at the Billings Gazette. And, being a recent graduate of University of Montana School of Journalism, and then to be able to have a staff job right out of college was very fortunate. Being able to be a journalist in my hometown was also a really interesting experience for me as well. But it took an unexpected turn when, I wanted more. I wanted to get out of Montana. I mean, I've raised here, and I actually left a staff job, which at the time, over 10 years ago, that was like, you do not do that. Once you lock into a staff job, you hold on to that thing as long as you can. But, I had a little bit of an ego. I'll be honest, like being back home, I kind of felt like I was taking a step back, and I went to some photo workshops, which changed my life, honestly, and we can get to that another time. But I went to a photo workshop and was starting to meet photojournalists and editors from all over the country. And I was like, oh, there's more out there for me. And so I quit my staff job and actually went back to interning, which is like an insane trajectory and not something I would totally recommend. But I mean, you lose your 401k match, like you're losing, obviously getting paid biweekly at a better rate than an internship. But I went to Flint, Michigan. I wanted to cover the water crisis. I wanted to be in a community that looked differently than me. And I will say, like, making that change is the reason why I'm at the San Francisco Chronicle today in a staff position. Being at in Flint, Michigan, and making mistakes and learning from that community is the reason why I was able to get an internship at the Tampa Bay Times. It's the reason why I secured a grant with the Pulitzer Center to go to Iraq. And all of that helped me get a staff job in Austin, Texas, which led me to a staff job in San Francisco. So I think like taking risks and being ready to kind of eat some of that insecurity, but also being willing to, push yourself to go beyond your comfortability and your security and your bubble, and go learn from other places all around the country and communities that don't look like you, that don't think like you. I think that's why I'm been able to stay in staff positions, 10 years from now, from when I graduated, and I feel really fortunate. And that's all because I took a risk.
Thank you all for those stories. Those were very insightful. It was amazing to hear. I'm going to go to the chat real fast. We had a question pop in there, and it says, can you reflect on a journalist's fiduciary duty to dig out facts in light of financial pressure to shade or withhold facts?
I can hop in briefly. I mean, as primarily a features journalist and not a hard news journalist, I don't know that my insight is here is like the most useful, but I will say, and I appreciate this reminder, that I feel very fortunate to have never found myself in a position where I've been pressured, or the implication has been to somehow evade facts, slant them a certain way, do something that made me ethically uncomfortable in the name of making money. I'm sure it happens. I do also think there is sort of like a popular idea, maybe media driven, or maybe I'm naive. I'm sort of willing to throw that out there, that it happens more frequently than it does. I think there are a lot more, especially in legacy media, I guess, like operators that are very much on the up and up and hold the kind of ethics that Jackson and Bronte were talking about, like pretty sacrosanct, than maybe the popular impression of media sometimes gives off.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an answer. I mean, sports related, it's not too like life or death in terms of like serious stuff, but what she was talking about earlier about, integrity and truth. I try to do that, in sports media specifically, because there's so much out there when you look on Twitter or whatever, and now with AI and stuff, you don't really know what's real nowadays. And I kind of value myself with, being that new age of being a digital media person or being on TikTok and stuff like that. Whatever I know is true, whatever's true, I like to react to before I even, make a video about or even talk about it too. So I really think just the truth about anything you do is like the most important thing. And yeah, I don't really remember the rest of the question, but I'm not too, I guess, advanced in that field to answer, so.
Yeah, I would, to Brian's point too, like, again, with legacy news media journalism, I mean, most of them operate to a pretty high standard of ethics. But that's not to say we're not seeing like a business model of journalism that's being broken. And I do worry about that. And personally, I haven't been in a situation where I've had to kind of withhold facts or been pressured to do so. You know, if anything, like I try to hold my newsroom to a really high standard when I'm seeing something that I could define as lazy, or maybe doing quick hits and clickbait to get more views. That's something that I'm really sensitive about. But I think, you know, without accountability, there's going to be more corruption, and that can be outside of a newsroom, that can be inside of a newsroom. You know, if we start to have people in charge making bad decisions, you know, that threatens the media ecosystem. With no accountability, and without accountability, I mean, that's a really dangerous place for us to a world for us to live in. And so I want to, that's why I think there's a kind of a difference between journalists and media. I mean, what we do is an essential service for democracy. And when we start seeing cuts and we start seeing people, journalists that have dedicated their lives to asking hard questions and holding the powerful accountable, when we're seeing those people getting laid off, and we're seeing cuts to, for example, a whole sports department being cut, right? We start seeing these changes to maybe save some money. I mean, I really worry about that, because without accountability, again, there's more corruption. And so I think it's hard to monetize holding the powerful accountable. And that's something that deeply concerns me, you know? And so I would say, for me personally, like, no, I have not faced that. I do know it happens, but that's as a result of people not seeing journalism as an essential service for democracy. And so I think that's a question that we all need to be, a conversation that we all need to be having. And that's in the newsroom, and that's out of the newsroom as well. I hope that answers your question. I think I just went on a tangent.
I will say too, I mean, among the ways I've considered myself lucky in my career, there's two right now that are a little bit germane to this. I mean, one is that, like, I think I have always managed to work for places that take it as an article of faith that, let me step back for a second. I think the notion, there's something Bronte said about clickbait that I think, I think you drew this distinction even the way you phrased it, but the idea of, like, yeah, clickbait is what it is, and it's not journalism, and it's a model of making money. Not a lot of it though. But the idea of like getting eyeballs. I've never worked somewhere that doesn't care quite a bit about getting eyeballs, as well they should. Like, we want to create stories and content, I hate that word, but there it is, that people want to read and consume. Like, we all spend a lot of time here, and we spend a lot of time at Down East thinking about our audience and what's going to, like, entertain and inform and move them. And what's, going to make them better citizens of Maine, what's going to make them better citizens of the world. And, like, 100% we care about publishing stuff that people want to read. I think I'm lucky, to get back to it, to have worked at places that take it as an article of faith, that goes hand in hand with being transparent and forthright, and honoring good reporting and good fact checking, and coherent fidelity to what's true and real, and occasionally holding the powerful to account, or exposing what needs exposing. I also feel very, very lucky right now, I have to say, to be working someplace that has an incredibly robust research and fact checking apparatus, which, as I mentioned before, is very rare. I mean, we hand every story over to a massive team of people over there whose entire job is to go through it word by word, sentence by sentence, and verify every detail, to the point where it's, like, rather annoying and we butt heads. But I couldn't be happier to have these guys on our side. And any place that still invests in that should be rewarded and applauded, and the people who do the work should too.
Well, I want to thank Bob for dropping that question to the chat. And if anybody else has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. We did just have another one come in that I will ask you three. And it is, what did you have a favorite or most memorable story or project that you've covered?
I will speak to one that I published recently. One, I'm super proud about it because I pitched it, I wrote it, I did the photos, and I produced the video too. So it's, for me, it's a huge accomplishment of, skills I've honed in for 10 years, and being able to really have control over it, but also have a really collaborative approach with editors, copy editors, designers, animators. And, we all work together to produce something really beautiful. But I think the biggest accomplishment for me in this story was, it was about the removal of 4 dams on one of the largest rivers in California, the Klamath River. It talked about this 20-year battle, largely indigenous led, of getting these dams removed and restoring the salmon populations. The Klamath used to be the 3rd largest salmon producing river in the country. Now they're in single-digit runs. But I really wanted to focus on, it was basically an exploration of generational healing through dam removal in indigenous communities. A lot of these communities have been living with the legacies of really, traumatizing systems and policies, and the effects of colonization. And they're still living with those impacts today. But I really wanted to focus on this story of hope and what happens when tribes and organizations and corporations and farmers, they all come together for a common goal, which was to get these dams out of the river, and to see the salmon come back right away after the dams were removed. I mean, it really just was, for me, a story of hope and something that we don't really see often in the news. And truly, I think it's like one of the biggest stories in our country right now, about this, one of the largest infrastructure projects in the country, in history, of removing these dams, and but also just showing the timeline of one family's healing process through dam removal, and the fight that it took on them to be able to get them removed. And I'm just really proud of it. It wasn't a story that was really handed to me. It was over 3 years of going into communities and building trust, but also recognizing that, some newsrooms have a pretty horrible history of exploiting some of these communities. And so seeing the headlines that, the Chronicle put out in the 60s and the 70s, and being like, wow, we did some damage. Like, wow, we've broken some trust. And I felt really proud that I could reflect on that and try to kind of bridge some of the gaps and listen to the communities that we serve. And, it was a lot of learning. There's a lot of patience on both ends. And I just feel really proud that we could tell that story in a different way. And so that, and I got to do all of it too, which is honestly insane. And I don't know if I would recommend that, but I just feel really proud of that story. And it was published in December.
Wow. Mine's not up to that scale. That was pretty big and massive, but I think for me, my biggest accomplishment, like I said, starting a podcast in college, and creating, I know Brian doesn't like the word content, but content on there as well too. I got invited to the college football playoff semifinal this last year, but it wasn't just me as a radio station, it was me individually, which was a pretty big deal. Obviously, it's hard to get to, a lot of these events as multiple people from across the nation try to apply, and they only bring a certain amount of people in. So I was just proud of myself for not only getting invited to, an event like that, of that magnitude, an event that I've watched, ever since I was a kid, but just kind of taking the most out of it, creating videos, whether that was interviews. Like, I got to interview Michael Irvin. I got to interview some of the players, even their Ole Miss's quarterback, about Montana. So it was cool to see, the feedback from there. And then also get, production out of it. Like, I think it was like 3 million views collectively from all the videos that I posted. It was just kind of a big moment of, looking back on my journey and being able to go to an event like that credentialed for me instead of being represented by a company was pretty special. So nothing to do with dams, nothing to do with anything like monumental or anything, but it was pretty special for me. So that's my little spiel.
But I mean, that's like a testament to like your doggedness and your prowess to be able to just like kind of be self-made, right? Like it's so hard to go into these spaces not being represented by a company or an organization. Like that takes a lot of commitment, and it just goes to show that you're willing to knock back down, you're willing to put yourself out there. And I think like at a time where there is this like emphasis to be a self-made person. Not all journalists are meant for social media. They're not meant for like podcasting. But I think like you're well ahead of your time to be able to be like, look, I am my own unit and I belong in these spaces. So I just want to congratulate you on that, because that takes a lot of work.
I appreciate that. And I feel like YouTube relates too. This business is hard and it takes so long. And I don't think you realize it, because I think out of college, you graduate, you're like, okay, I'm just going to get a job. It's all going to line up and I'm going to be good. Like everything's going to be good. I'm going to get a yes. No, you get so many no's. Like I didn't even go full time at my job I have right now until I graduated in 22. I didn't get this job until July of 2025. So I'm sure we'll talk more about the other questions and stuff like that. But just the way I got this job is just a crazy story in itself, and networking. So, but no, I appreciate that. And it's cool to, connect and obviously, answer people's questions. So I'll toss it to you, Brian.
I can be pretty concise. I freelanced for the better part of 10 years when I wasn't in a staff job at all. And I wrote a lot of pieces during that time that I'm proud of and that I look back on fondly. And I don't know that I can pick one necessarily. And some of them were, just profiles, and some of them were more hard reportage, and some of them had like longer tail, like effects in a community or an area. And some of them were just great storytelling. But I think what I get most excited about or reminiscing about, what I look forward to most doing again, was as editor-in-chief at Down East, we would do like themed issues and gimmick issues every so often. It's something that I really love about magazine making. And again, I say magazine and I mean magazine media, digital content or print. But the idea of sort of like putting together like a special projects, we would sometimes say, where we would like throw out the whole content or throw out the whole structure of the issue and just like reinvent what 112 pages can be from scratch, or you're creating some beautiful multimedia thing on the website that doesn't like fit the template of your normal website where you're building something. And we would do this with all kinds of themes. Again, this is like primarily sort of like a lifestyle general interest magazine, but also contains a lot of reporting. And so you do a special issue that was entirely focused on the islands. Maine has like a little more than a dozen inhabited islands, and then they have their own social issues and problems and their own sort of bits of wonder and their own sort of special way of life, or focus on another like isolated region of the state, or an issue that focused on one particular year in Maine history and why it was pivotal to what the state has become since and what the culture has become. Or God, I can't even think of some of the other special issues. One that was entirely focused on people over 70 years old. Like we would see these lists that you always see that's like 30 under 30, 40 under 40. So we did an entire issue that was just stories about people who were over 70. Maine's the oldest state in the nation. And I think what made me the proudest about that is that you would really work at the mix of like, lifestyle reportage service, heavy and light, something that shed light on the contemporary issues that were facing the state, whether it was like indigenous calls for sovereignty, for example. Maine is a weird state politically and fun and glorious, along with profiles of personalities, along with photo-driven stuff. And when those things came together well, and you'd have readers like say, God, man, that made me look at Maine Island life in a way I never had before, or that made me understand Aroostook County or whatever, or that made me better at loving this place in the way that good media, like reading Rolling Stone or something, for example, makes you better at loving music. That was always really fulfilling, because you just fired on like all these cylinders.
Yeah, that was so cool to hear all the different things these alumni have done in their careers. And those are some pretty awesome stories. We got a couple more questions in the Q&A here, so I'll keep going with those. And this one says, do you keep up with any Montana media, and what do you think of the future of Montana journalism looks like in such a large state with consolidated newspapers and federal cuts to public media?
I haven't lived out west for 16 years, but I'm still an avid reader of high country news. I'll say it's not Montana explicitly, but it's an amazing publication and it enriches my life. I can't speak as well to the Montana media ecosystem or at all, really. But yeah, God bless HCN. They do great work.
I can't either. I focus more on, football and obviously national stuff going on. I tune into, what's going on. Obviously, Coach Houck retiring. That was big news this week in terms of Montana, but I don't really have an opinion on that question, unfortunately.
I went home recently for the holidays, Billings again, and again, I always try to stay in touch with people I used to work at the Billings Gazette with. All of them are gone. And I am really, really close to Larry Mayer, who's the chief of photo at the Billings Gazette. He was one of my mentors. He gave me a lot of my start. He's been at the Billings Gazette. He's celebrating 50 years as a photographer, as a photojournalist. It's his first and his last job once he decides to retire. And I recently visited the newsroom, which that newsroom's it was bought and then it was unbought, and it's for sale, that building in downtown Billings, and it sits largely empty. There are a few journalists that are still there, mostly editors. I went and visited, and I walked in and all the desks are gone. There's just kind of these like moonscapes of where the desks were. All of the publishing offices, the administration offices have been cleared out. When you walk into that newsroom, I mean, it's just like, you wouldn't know that at one point it used to just be filled with journalists. It used to be filled with writers and designers and photographers and publishers and I mean, all these things. And that was a really sobering moment for me because it just goes to show how the challenges that Montana journalists are facing. It's the same with the Missoulian. I think a lot about all the cuts and the layoffs and the departments that have been shuttered, and it makes me really sad for Montana because, again, when you have newsrooms being gutted, when you have journalists losing jobs, when you have no infrastructure to retain them, then you open a community up to corruption. You open this community up to vulnerabilities where people come in and they start to do things and you have no one asking the questions. Why? And when journalists stop asking questions, that becomes a really big problem for communities. And I see it in my own. I see the conspiracy theories. I see the division. And that really concerns me. And I think that's why it's so important to support local journalists and support local journalism. I want to shout out the Montana Free Press. I want to shout out Yellowstone Public Media. I want to shout out local photojournalists like Taylor Irvine and Louise Johns. Those are their stories that I'm watching all the time. And so I think it's really important to do the work, look up these organizations, look up these newspapers, go and look up who the journalists are. I think for me, it's not so much following a newspaper. It's more for me following the individuals. For me following the individual reporters. And that's why I'll follow the Montana Free Press, fine. But I'm really following journalists that I know, journalists that I trust, journalists that I respect. So yeah, I mean, I'm reading the New York Times and I'm reading, NPR, and I love ProPublica. I love the work that they do. But it's more so for me following the individuals that are actually producing the work and actually doing the research and asking the questions. That's for me, that's my workflow. That's how I stay informed. So I would encourage people to try to go beyond the headlines, try to go beyond the actual website, and actually look up the individuals and learn about them and see what they care about and see what they're reporting on. I think that also just kind of helps with the massive information and the massive news. When you're following just some select individuals, I think it kind of helps your brain organize it a little bit better, and it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So that would be my kind of advice, and that's certainly how I go about informing myself, and specifically in Montana.
Bob's question in the comments here is kind of beating me to the punch. But, I was a regular reader of the Missoula Independent when I was in town. And I know that's been gone for probably close to a decade now, 2017, 2018. But my old friend Erica Fredrickson started what's called The Pulp, about which I know very little because I'm not in Western Montana all that much anymore, except that it's still going strong and that it follows the nonprofit model that Bob's mentioning in the comments, and that it got some sort of recognition from an outfit called Lion Publishers, which I know a little bit about because they're active in the city regional magazine space as well, which is an organization that supports and helps drive solutions and does some grant making for nonprofit newsrooms around the country. And I think that's a model that we're still in like the baby steps of figuring it out, but it has legs. It requires some adaptations. You can't. I don't think you can run the equivalent of the Billings Gazette on a nonprofit model, but I think you can probably run something very much like the Independent on it. I have some very good friends back in Maine. I've gotten some attention in the last year because they took I guess it was 5 or 6 like community papers in small towns up and down the mid coast, which is sort of, well, that's what it sounds like, the middle part of the Maine coast, that had respectively been around, I think for anywhere from like 20 to 80 years, folded them into a single nonprofit news entity. It's called the Midcoast Villager. And they're doing terrific work by, I think, building an audience by expanding the coverage area. And that puts a lot of additional stress on resources and journalists, compared to when like just the Camden Herald, that's my former town, was, a handful of journalists reporting on just that region. Now you've got a bigger footprint, so there's some adaptation to do there. And also folding in, I think, more soft coverage, more lifestyle coverage, having small town papers that were pretty dedicated to reporting happenings at the town council and development matters and natural resource, stories are like, as in Montana, are always big in Maine. And, bringing in alongside that some of what you'd see in the, BCDE section, the local sports, of course, but what you'd see in the, lifestyle sections of a big paper like the Times or formerly the Post. And so bringing in new readers and packaging readers of smaller publications into like new and newly sized groups and figuring out where that balance of ad revenue and donations and grants and things are going to be. There's a future there. There will not be a future there for as many papers as there were with small staffs covering small areas 20, 50, 80 years ago. But I don't know that that's a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, I do think where I'm at, I mean, in California, in the Bay Area, what I'm seeing, not really in Montana, although I do kind of notice some whisperings of this growing in Montana, but I'm seeing like a lot of more worker-owned media collectives. And I think like that's a result of what has largely been happening in the media landscape, right? We're talking about mass layoffs. We're talking about, things happening that's resulted in journalists losing jobs. And I think what happens there is journalists come together and they're like, well, let's make this kind of co-op, like let's do this the way we want to do it. And so like, for example, the Coyote Media Collective in the Bay Area has launched recently, and it's gotten a lot of success, and I hope it continues to do so. But those are all journalists that have been laid off, and they all came together and they started a media collective. And I do think we're going to start seeing that in the future, where we're going to have, the industry of media is changing. I don't know personally, not for the better. And I think it's going to start to be up to journalists to decide like how they're going to continue to keep telling important stories and keep asking the right questions so that, communities like Montana don't end up in the dark. And so I'm seeing that. That's what I'm seeing on my end of something that's
So I want to go back to what Bronte was kind of talking about earlier about consuming media. How do you three consume your news and stay informed in key stories about the things in your field?
Yeah, I'll start. I consume a lot of podcasts. Obviously ones that I trust that are more credible, that will actually give me a lot of, information. Like obviously, I cover the NFL draft too, so people like Todd McShay or Daniel Jeremiah, those are guys that get intel from other teams. I also read a lot. The Athletic, like a couple years ago at the Final Four, I met Reese Davis, who is the host of College Game Day, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey, what's your biggest advice?" Like, I know you get asked that a lot, but like, I try to take that from anyone I meet that's been doing it as successfully as he has. And he said read and write's been the two for him. And he redirected me to going to the Athletic or going to some of those sports, trustworthy news outlets that you can go to that are factual. So that's why I consume. I read a lot, listen to a lot, and just try to stay in the loop with what's going on in football. So.
I'm drowning all the time, to be honest, in more ways than one. I mean, I feel like I'm drowning in a number of things I feel like I ought to be reading at any given time. I'm also working 80 hours a week and don't have nearly as much time to consume media as I really, really, truly should. My answer's not it's very fulfilling, but I do try to have a targeted and highly curated number of Substacks because they can really add up, and it's pretty soon you're not reading anything. You're just deleting things out of your inbox. But I do find that to be a great medium with a lot of smart people doing good work. Some of them making money, not very many, to get deep into niche interests. Read the print New York Times at least on Sundays, and keep up with the website like probably everybody else. Podcasts for me tend to be like something fun and entertaining when I'm running. I've never really had a phase where I was turning to podcasts for like hard news necessarily. I tried listening to The Daily for a little while. It's just not what I want from an audio experience, and I think I might be in the minority as far as that goes, or maybe I'm not. I'm not sure. But as far as keeping up on like you say, stories in your field, it's Substacks, it's print, it's like the handful of things I've curated my few remaining social media accounts to give me, and it's the handful of legacy magazines that I still really, really love, like Outside, New Yorker, kind of the classics. High Country again.
Yeah, I love High Country. I also say when you are working in news, when you're not working, you really are trying to rest and recharge. And so I try to be really mindful and try to have a good balance where when I'm on the clock, it's news. When I'm off the clock, it's news. I think being inundated with all of that can take a toll on your psyche. But like I mentioned earlier in my last response, I tend to follow more individual journalists than I do an entire organization. So there's a lot of writers and photojournalists and video journalists that I follow, that I really respect, that I really believe in, that I feel inspired by. And so those individuals are who I'm going for. So I would encourage everybody, if you have a newspaper, a magazine, a podcast, if there's something that you really love, you really care about, I would try to, do your research on the individual and learn about them and follow them directly, so that you are getting that kind of exploration of thought and what they're researching, is kind of how I would approach it. But I have a lot of respect for, there's a lot of investigative journalists that are doing podcasts that I really respect. And, but yeah, I would say I really enjoy just focusing on the individuals and following their work.
Well, thank you three for those answers. We're getting pretty close here to the hour, so one, maybe two more questions. And I want to talk about a mentor or a networking opportunity real fast that maybe made a significant difference in your career.
Yeah, it was landing this job. Like I said, I started out working at a small radio station in Arizona part-time. Then I worked at valet for a minute, for about a year, and then my shins hurt too bad, so I started to not go valet and work towards something that was a little more relaxed. I worked at a golf course here in Scottsdale called TBC Scottsdale, and it was frustrating. Man, I worked at part-time working at a golf course, part-time working at a radio station for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And then I came across the guy I work for right now, John Middlecoff, who, for those who don't know The Volume, it's ran by Colin Cowherd. Colin Cowherd is one of the legends in sports media. I'm sure you see him on Fox or wherever. Actually met him in San Francisco last week, which was pretty cool. He's a lot taller in person than I thought. But anyways, I met him at the golf course and I just introduced myself. And I think that's something that you can learn if you're out there and you're wanting to seek an opportunity. Just go and just introduce yourself. Be social. Be you. And because you never know what that will lead to. And that one introduction, I didn't see him for like another 6 or 7 months. I introduced myself again, and we ended up following each other on socials and stuff. And he ended up seeing my content that I was posting or the work that I was doing on the side from my radio job, from my golf job, and that ultimately led me to getting this producer job today. But I would just say that opportunity of working at my golf job out of all places I would have thought I would have got my other opportunity. I initially thought I was going to be for my radio job, but I don't think I would have gotten it if it wasn't for the extra work that I put on the side. So that was just a huge opportunity, and I'm forever grateful for him, obviously, to be working at the Volume. So that was my biggest network opportunity, was meeting the guy that I work for right now at my golf course job, of all places. That kind of just tells you, at least my industry, like the opportunities you get can be so random and so lucky as meeting someone at a golf course. So.
And I think, I mean, to generalize the point that Jackson's making, in my experience now, and I think to a degree that's probably truer than other fields, never having worked in another one, I think this is like, I mean, it's a discipline that kind of rewards gregariousness, and that can be daunting if you're not somebody who's naturally like go shake somebody's hand on the golf course kind of person, but in a way that I hope is not, or that is actually like a useful piece of advice. Like, I think being comfortable talking to strangers is kind of something you're going to need to do in journalism anyway. So if that part gives anyone pause, like that's a great thing to probably find a way past. And then when I was an intern, I took every single person on the editorial staff. This was 2002, and editorial staffs were a lot bigger, out to lunch one at a time over the course of 6 months. And I think that was like, I didn't think of it as networking at the time necessarily. I thought of it as like, well, God damn it, I have 6 months here. I'm going to like maximize the amount that I get from these people and just like availing themselves of their expertise. But I think doing stuff like that, if you are somebody who's at the beginning of their career, is valuable from a cutthroat networking standpoint, but just valuable as a human being, valuable as a professional. Being at Montana opened a lot of doors for me. I had one person in particular, an editor at Outside Magazine, which I was fond of even then, who showed up at Montana. He was an alumni, and called the director of the MFA program and said, hey, while I'm in town, is there anybody I should talk to that's sort of like, on the trajectory where they want to write magazine long form stories? Like, had a beer with this guy and led to stories. And that was, I mean, I look back on that as like a turning point. And then there's social media, and I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about that. I mean, when Twitter was more of a robust environment, I was a much more active user and found it a really useful place to feel out editors as a freelancer, get a sense of like what they were all about, their likes and dislikes, their mannerisms. Also writers as an editor, see what people were interested in, who was doing good work and whatever else, make chatty conversations with mutuals, and developed like meaningful professional context that way. Twitter went down in flames. If something has replaced it, Blue Sky or whatever, I no longer give a shit. I'm just not invested in that world anymore. So I'm like no longer really sure where that kind of networking is happening online, and I suddenly feel like I'm too old to care. But I'm sure it's still out there somewhere, and maybe someone else knows better.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's always been about intentionality. Like I feel like, and it's different with sports or writing. I think for a visual standpoint, what really helped me was going to photo workshops. So we're talking about either a week long, 5 days, 3 days of workshops where photojournalists from all over the country and the globe come together to really hone in on their craft and listen to speakers and get portfolio reviews. And I would go to those. I went to two in Denver, the Image Deconstructed. I went to Eddie Adams. I went to, the 7 Agency workshop in Missouri. And every single time I would be meeting editors from the New York Times, Nat Geo, Time, writers, I mean, all the, megas. And, but I think there's a way to do it. I mean, I would, meet people, and I would get their name, and I would get an address, whether an email or a physical one, and I would hand write thank you notes. I would say, hey, thank you so much for spending this time with me. And like, here's what I learned from you. And here's what I took away. And I would literally handwrite these thank you cards and send them to editors. And there's people I've met within the 10 years of my career that'll be like, I still have your thank you note on my fridge, and also I got a staff job as a result of one thank you card. Got my job in Texas and he's now James Gregg. He's the photo chief of the Seattle Times. I would say he's been my mentor throughout my entire career. Someone that is very, very close to me, very, very important in my life, all because of one thank you note. And I think like that is just such an intentional and respectful way of letting people know that their time was valuable to you. And I really couldn't stress that enough. Like, I know it feels old school or whatever, but I think people remember, they remember the impression that you leave them, even if it's just an email, right? And I also would say that I've had so much rejection in my career, but I've always taken the rejection as an opportunity to be better, to grow. And, when you get those rejection emails, that's an email that you got from somebody. So then staying in contact with them in the future, being like, well, maybe in, a year or 3 years, you can go back to that, whoever that email was, or you got that rejection email and be like, here's what I've done so far. And staying in contact. And so I think that because of the photo workshops, because of the editors, but also the other photojournalists, like you never know who you're going to end up working with or working for. And so I think like giving off a good first impression, a real one, an honest one, is going to last you many years in this industry.
And I'm sorry, I know we're out of time. Bronte, I'm so glad you mentioned conferences and stuff, because like that can be easy to forget. But just if anybody needs to hear this on the call, like also like as a student, there's money to send you to that sort of thing. I mean, maybe it's dwindling, but if there's like places where you think you can do some of that networking, workshops, conferences, whatever else, like I feel like this is something that isn't necessarily advertised to you as an undergrad or a grad student, but like find those opportunities, Google around, find a thing you want to attend, go to your advisor, go to whoever is the admin in your office and say like, I want to go to this, where's their funds? And I think you can sometimes be surprised how just like some office somewhere in Missoula has $1,300 to send you to a thing. I know that paid off for me a couple times.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, you go.
The University of Montana School of Journalism is in its second year, will be its third year of the photo workshop. And so anyone on the call that is in the journalism department or specifically in sports photography or just, photojournalism, that is one of the most amazing things that I've been teaching at every year. Is something I helped implemented with the folks at the journalism school. So do it. It's amazing. And it's a great opportunity. And in fact, one of our students, I got a job, an internship at the San Francisco Chronicle. So I just think it's an amazing opportunity.
I was just going to say real quick, every role I've gotten with LinkedIn, and I've like 100 LinkedIn, like, don't see anything, and you can meet whoever. There's jobs and roles that aren't on the job website, so don't be discouraged.
Yes, so we are all out of time for today, but I want to give a huge thank you to Bronte, Brian, and Jackson for taking some time out of their day to come chat with us today. That was an absolutely amazing conversation. For any students on the call, it is Career Days 2026 going on right now, so make sure to check out the rest of the career events and throughout the month to be entered for prizes. And we will be back here in 2 weeks for the next Griz Paths with non-professionals. So registration is open today, and we will see you on February 25th. So once again, huge thank you to our panelists, and until next time, go Griz.